Hello, kia ora, and welcome to the Creative Matters podcast, where we have inspiring conversations with artists from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm your host, Mandy Jakic. Angela Rowe is an artist, writer, curator, and a mentor based in Whangārei. Her creative practice includes storytelling across performance, installation, photography, drawing, and textile works. Angela is interested in the future of arts in Aotearoa and how to create a more sustainable arts industry. She founded Creative Practice, a collaborative mentoring program designed to empower artists and creatives with a focus on resilience and community support. I loved hearing stories about Angela's grandparents and how they have influenced her so much and her practice. Angela talks about her Bachelor of Fine Arts at Whitecliffe in 2004 and why she returned 15 years later to complete her Masters. She also speaks about her fascinating final installation and performance show, I Used to Find Dead Insects in Your Pockets. We talk about her selfie series of works, first created in lockdown and still ongoing, where she shifts the photographic image of herself to pencil on repurposed hand-dyed cloth, and then she embeds the image in line with black thread. We have such a wonderful chat about the real, sometimes challenging, life of an artist, applying for funding, maintaining multiple income streams, creating work that you're passionate about but might not be able to be sold easily, selling work without being represented by a gallery, the merits of entering art awards, and so much more. This conversation is such a great listen with lots and lots of tips for artists and things to think about, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it as much as I enjoy talking with Angela. Kia ora, Angela.
Kia ora.
Lovely to see you.
And it's so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've been very excited researching your amazing practice and the way you approach your art and what you do. And I'm looking forward to hearing all about it. So can you start us off, please, with a little bit of background information?
Sure. Well, recently I've been looking at my grandmother's backstories and their own histories. So I was based in Auckland, and both of my families were also from Auckland. One of my paternal grandmother was a teacher, and she also had studied art and went to a technical college in Auckland, probably in the 40s. And I had discovered some of her old notebooks and journals from her time at this training institution. And she'd learned colour history, colour theory, art history. She also had trained as an art teacher working with children. So she was a really interesting person for me to discover as an adult, because I'm really interested in arts and education and the way that we learn and how we learn through play, and how creativity is a really important factor in learning and education. And alongside of finding her old journals, I also found like sketches and drawings, and one artwork that I think I may have shared with you, which was a drawing of my dad as a child. And it was a really beautiful drawing that when I found it, it just really made me pause and reflect, because on that side of my family, they're all dead. So there's no sort of no one I can go back to and ask questions from. So I feel like I'm rediscovering and learning about my family through these little fragments that I've been lucky to find that were from my nana. So this was a drawing. I think he looked like he was probably 4 or 5. And I think about her as I was as a mum with a young child, really wanting to make work and do drawings and keep my creativity going. And I see it as like a trace of her stopping at a time when she might otherwise have got on with the housework or done other jobs or seen to other jobs.
And that drawing is so beautiful, isn't it? And it's actually does remind me of your work, that sort of quite lineal, gentle line through it.
Yeah, it was really interesting when I found it, because I very much feel like my practice is a drawing practice. So I keep myself making drawings and sketching, and the line feels really important, regardless of the media that I'm using. And if it was a really interesting work to find. And then I decided, I'll also work with it. I will take this and I'll continue the work that my nana started, and I'll make a stitch drawing of my dad. For me, like when I got to that point, it was like this moment of really understanding how I work and what I'm doing, and what sort of core in my practice. So I made that stitch work is stitched into a textile that I've hand dyed with avocado skins and seeds. And the thread I had dyed with indigo. So it's another, a different kind of color combination, which you might see from my other stitched portraits, which is black thread, pencil or pen, into my avocado skin and seed dyed textiles. So I spend a lot of time with my dad's parents. That nan in particular died when I was 8. And so I do have quite strong memories of spending time with her at their house. And she was always making things. She sewed so many. She was, of that generation where you grew up and you learned how to sew and you would mend things. And she had made all of these, textiles around the house, and she'd made the curtains. So I grew up with this making and doing, and gardening. There was a lot of gardening as well, and that was on my dad's side. On my mother's side is also like a long history of makers. Garment sewers, home textile sewers. But my maternal nana, she came from quite a different background. Her father passed away when she was 15 and 15, and then she went and did some night classes because she needed to get a job, and she had quite a different story and motivation behind, the decisions she needed to make from quite a young age.
And were you a child who liked to draw?
Yes, I used to make drawings. I used to play with plasticine, and I used to be always making things. I've got these 2 tiny little bears that I made from a woman's weekly pattern that I found at my nana's place, that I sewed out of remnants of her curtains. So I'd made these teeny tiny bears, all hand sewn. So I used to make and stitch. Often I was stitching alongside of my nana.
Which is so beautiful, isn't it? And that, especially that, that they live on through your practice.
Yeah, that's what I feel like I'm doing. I'm remaking, and I'm connecting back, and I might not be able to have a in-person conversation like we can, but I feel like I'm drawing on those threads that are there, or strengthening them, or staying in touch.
That's lovely. So high school, was that a happy place for you in the art room? Were you sort of discovering your creativity at that time?
Yes, I really loved art. So I would often be in the lunchroom, in the art room, at lunchtime, and hanging out there. That was where I felt good. Horticulture and art were my favorite subjects. So, and I stayed on until sixth form, and I did all the usuals. I did painting, and, studied Cezanne and learned how to paint like Van Gogh, or, attempted to paint like Van Gogh. And, reflecting back, something that I've thought about now and as part of my current practice is that we were learning about all of these old masters, and I don't remember studying or learning about any women painters, not even Frida Kahlo, these other momentous people that are so embedded in our history.
Yeah, unfortunately that was the case, and probably still is slightly, I would say.
I think so, unless people are really doing the work as educators, and really motivated to change that.
So what happened after high school? Were you thinking that you definitely wanted a career in the visual arts and you were going to become an artist, or did you have some other thoughts?
Yes, I really wanted to be an artist. I wanted to either be a marine biologist or an artist. And but at that time in my family, it wasn't really an option to go to university. I was living in Snells Beach. There weren't any institutions that I could connect with unless I was ready to move back to Auckland. So I worked a couple of part-time jobs, and it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I decided to go to art school, and that's when I applied to Wycliffe.
Mm. And how did you find Wycliffe, and what were you studying?
Wycliffe was so good. I originally applied to Elam and wasn't successful in getting into Elam because I didn't have seventh form certificate back in those days. But Wycliffe were really welcoming, and they had a really interesting cohort. So it was a group of people who were wanting to study art, and I had quite a wide range of ages, which was nice because by that time I was in my early 20s, so I was an adult student. Yeah, and that was at their old campus as well, up in Grafton.
Yeah, yeah. And were you using your drawing skills, or were you sort of starting to bring in stitch at that point?
At that, artists were painters. So I was like, yes, drawing is really important. It's fun. I think drawing is fundamental to our creative practice. Whatever your outcome is, I think it's it's an important way to get your eye in and really learn how to see the world, which was something that I was able to practice and hone, especially with Anton Chapman, who was the drawing teacher at the time, who's a fantastic drawing teacher and painting teacher. So the first couple of years, I did lots of painting and drawing classes, and I ended up making some different decisions, mostly around the fact that I was very interested in craft techniques and technology. So I was looking at, sort of alongside of doing the painting and drawing, I was looking at siapo and tapa making. I was also took the opportunity to do a harakeke workshop with Donna Campbell at the time, and that sort of opened up a whole range of other media and processes that I could use. And I really enjoy working with my hands. So it for me, it felt like this was really what I needed to be doing and what I wanted to be doing.
Mm.
And yeah. And I think I probably felt more confident working with my hands than with paint. Or I think it's quite it's quite a different medium to work with.
Yeah, it is. And some people are just completely passionate about paint and that process and that medium, and others, everyone's different. So it's so fascinating, isn't it, how people are just drawn to certain mediums or certain techniques. And where that comes from, who knows? I mean, often it is from their childhood, but I find that quite fascinating.
I also found that, like at the time, I was, I had come through, I had worked full time before, and I had quit that and was just doing part time work to study, and flatting in Auckland, and I didn't have a lot of cash, and I was like, actually painting, buying paint, quality paint, and canvases, and all of that. It really starts to add up. And I was also looking at various art movements or history. So I was looking at Art Provera movement, and I was looking at ideas around sustainability and using what you have, and that prompted me to look at what was going on around me with fresh eyes. Also at that time, it was right when we were at the point where the single-use plastic bag ban was getting a lot of media and a lot of attention. And I was flatting with a huge group of people, like there were maybe 6 or 7 of us. So we had a lot of plastic bags coming into the house. And there were some fabulous colors, which I really loved. And I was like, I'd been learning about tapa making, and I'd been learning about layering, and I knew about textile. So I was like, well, if I can play around with this plastic, and I can make a new sort of material or textile to work with. So I basically just started ironing. I was ironing back in my undergraduate days. I was ironing these plastic bags together. It's not a new technology. It's really lo-fi and easy. But it gave me a new medium to work with, and the colors were really fascinating. I also discovered that, ironing a plastic bag with a logo would release the logo onto the paper, which I used. And so there was all of these interesting things that were coming out of the process. And then I went on to create these quite large-scale works made of plastics. They were made from the non-biodegradable plastics, so they're still around now, and they'll be around many hundreds of years. And I was really interested. I was engaging in a sort of personal level with, I don't want to be making waste, and what can we do? And I was behind the ban on single-use plastic bags. We need to make those big shifts. So it was like a fertile area conceptually, and within arts and activism in those areas too. The last 2 years of that, I was working in plastic, or I was working also in crochet. So I was crocheting with computer cables and things, which
wow, how amazing!
Quite removed from painting, which I thought I would, in the first year.
Yeah, it's interesting how that came out. And were you making portraits at that point at all?
No, I never imagined that I would want to make portraits, certainly not self-portraits. I was moving so far away from more like figurative or representative art making. I was more about objects in space, and I was more about the rituals of making and craft techniques, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, so fascinating. So what happened after Whitecliffe? Where did you go? And then it would be really interesting to hear about your journey to now making the kind of work that you are making.
Well, yeah, sure. Well, I, like lots of people after art school, there wasn't a job as an artist that I could just step into or apply for. So I was working part-time at the Lido Cinema as a projectionist, and I was working also part-time at Auckland Art Gallery as an art interpreter. So I was taking groups of school children through and doing sort of education work there, which I really loved.
I did that too. I worked at Auckland Art Gallery as an educator for a while. Yeah,
oh, nice.
That's a great job.
You get to know the collection so well.
Yeah, and you just have that sort of deeper appreciation for it. And I found that when we worked with an artwork in the gallery, regularly, you became almost attached to it. It felt like they were part of your family. It was just a very sort of deep connection to this work, especially once you'd learned from curators, the backstories, and then kind of sharing it with children or adults took it to another level again. It was just, it was an amazing experience.
Yeah, definitely. And I had the same feeling of working there for a few years, and I felt like I knew these works so well, and they were familiars to me, that I could go and I'd be like, oh, this one, yes, and and remember what was behind the work. And I think that's a really powerful thing with art, is that once we, if we put the time in and make some effort and get to know the artwork, it's like getting to know another person. And
yeah, it really is. And I feel so strongly about providing opportunities for children and teenagers to actually discover art and learn more about it, learn how to communicate and interpret artworks, which is in the curriculum, but it is sadly lacking, I think, in schools.
Interesting.
They might do one trip to the art gallery and that's it. But I just feel there's so much potential with that kind of thing linking to literacy as well.
Yep.
But it's kind of untapped at the moment.
Yeah. I think that our focus over many, many years has moved away from our creativity and arts as being an embedded component of many, many subjects that you can study. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a worry. It does concern me. There's so many of us who believe in the value of creativity and how that should be connected to everything that children learn. But it just seems to be taking a bit of a back seat at the moment for some reason.
Yeah, it's not surprising. I think arts have been undervalued here in New Zealand for so long, and that artists advocate for themselves and their work, and there's a lot that I think goes on, but until big picture, until we're prepared nationally to really back our artists and our creatives and really respect art and uphold it as much as we do sport, then we're always going to be hugely undervalued, and we won't have if people aren't seeing what's going on, if we're not seeing it in our local papers, if we're not seeing it on the news or hearing about it on the radio or in podcasts.
Yeah, that's so true though, isn't it? It's not really out there. It's not something that's discussed very much. Yeah, and when you say backing artists, what do you think that would look like?
I think we need to recognise that art is work, and that artists could contribute hugely to society and our community. So I think it's about, identifying that any profession, you need ongoing support and development. And in a really fundamental level, artists should be paid for their work. I think that we've talked a bit about it before, but there's so much unpaid labour in the arts, and our institutions that I don't think they should be having volunteers working out the back. I don't really think that we should be having volunteer internships. I think, people who've done a master's or done a PhD, I just get, I feel frustrated when I hear about these amazing people who are doing volunteer internships, and I'm like, they're contributing hugely to the running of that institution. They're contributing to our cultural resource, and they're using their skill and knowledge. They should be paid for it,
I agree. And there's that sort of attitude from some that, if you're this is slightly different to what you were just saying, but artists who have work and maybe a magazine is going to feature the work in their editorial, and there's a beautiful photo of their work, but they're not paid often for that, because they're saying, well, it's publicity for you, which is not fair to me.
No, because it's content for the magazine, right? It is. And I had this conversation with a friend of mine after my graduate, my show that I put together up here at Jeff Wilson Gallery after my master's, and my friend was saying, oh, this is great. And I was sort of just reflecting on, it was right in that point where I was trying to organize some last minute details, and I was like, I don't have, it's really hard to find the time to make sure I've got to do this, and now I've got to pay for some technical thing that I needed for the show. And I think they were just suddenly were asking the question of, are you not being paid for this exhibition? And I was like, no, I'm not paid anything for this. It's, with the support of someone who was working there, I managed to organize some pack and save vouchers for my artist talk, and I'm like, the work that I'm doing, I'm sharing knowledge and skills, and I'm sharing process and technique with your students, but, the institution didn't pay. And I'm like, and I think that they couldn't believe it, that artists were putting amazing work in an exhibition and they're not being paid, or having to cover the costs of materials in their own time and make sure that they can come and do the artist talk. Because in our funded institutions, the gallery hosts are paid, the curators on staff are paid, and the artists making the work that they're showcasing isn't paid. I think it's
the balance is wrong.
Yeah. So those things get frustrating after a point. Yeah,
it is frustrating, and I think I feel like there's more frustration around at the moment, probably because sales aren't as good as well, so that just kind of makes the situation even worse. But it's definitely a problem, and I don't think it's something that the current government's necessarily going to sort out.
No, I think it's low on their priority list, unfortunately.
Yeah. Anyway, we are hopping around a bit. So let's go back, and could you just give us a bit of an overview of what happened between your degree at Wycliffe and then coming back to do your master's in 2020?
Yeah, sure. So it felt for me like forever between. And once after I finished my BFA, I really wanted to come back, maybe take my mind, I'm like, take a couple of years out. This is what people do, and then come back and do my master's. But I ended up, I had two beautiful children, which took a lot of time and energy. And so that meant that I needed to sort of set aside my future study plans. And I worked part-time still. And I also kept making myself. I taught myself how to properly sew garments. So I learned to sew using my nana's old sewing machine, and sewing patterns and fabric and textile. So I was still really keeping my hand in with making, and I still very much enjoyed that. So during that time, I was connecting back in with those ideas around sustainability and making good quality clothing, and those longevity and ideas around quality handmade.
And then you decided to go and get your master's in fine arts.
That was back at Wycliffe. So Wycliffe had they had a scholarship program, and the opportunity came up where I could apply to do the master's under the scholarship program, and I had moved to Whangārei by then as well. So I was living out of Auckland, had a bit more space, and my kids were of a good age where I felt like I could commit to something properly as well as keep up all of my other commitments. So I took that opportunity. Yeah.
And was that something that you had decided you would always want to do, come back and do that master's, or did you get to a point where you just felt like you needed to do it for your practice?
Both things. I wanted to keep going. I wanted to make better work, and I wanted those things that a good postgrad program in the arts will offer, which is critical feedback, cohort of other artists to work with again. I think often artists that I work with have a similar experience to me, where they miss that community of artists and makers around them, and the value of just the conversations and that sort of a little bit of accountability. If you talk to someone about an idea, they're more likely to say, hey, did you follow up on that idea? Did you take up that new process you wanted to develop? And yeah, so that's what I wanted to connect back in with.
Yeah, and it's such an amazingly sort of inspiring community to be part of.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So what were you hoping to achieve by doing your master's?
I wanted to test out some ideas. So I had still been making. I had been working a little bit. My garment making for myself had moved into another space where I was looking at garments as sort of containers of bodies and the object of the textile. So I'd made these sort of test works that were not really non-wearable, but they were like a form of a garment. And so I was interested in those ideas in that space. I'd also been making these dolls, which is still a project for me to properly realize. These dolls were based on a sewing pattern that was my paternal nana's, and it was for these rag dolls that she had made for me and my brothers when we were kids. And I found the old pattern, and I found I was trying to help my mum sort out her house, and I found a suitcase that had parts of an unfinished doll. So I found these quite interesting objects that I felt that I needed to either make the doll, or I need to make a doll myself using the pattern and see how that feels. Because for me, these dolls themselves had this kind of rich significance for me on a really personal level as a child. So I had made these dolls also using some hospital textiles, which were like hospital sheets or the gowns that they give you to wear, because I was quite interested in the meaning of textiles when we put them on our body. And the textiles themselves say hospital property. And I was really interested in what happens when you wear a garment that says hospital property. And I was interested in what happens when you take that and you place it on a doll, and what those meanings are. And that's quite a big area that I need to take in more seriously and put more time to.
It is so true that the fabric that you're wearing, how it looks or how it feels or where it comes from, all of those things are such meaningful things to connect with. And especially that idea of the hospital fabric, which I experienced myself in January when I was having surgery. If only they could give you something that felt really nice on your body and felt like something that you'd like to wear. I'm sure that would be better for recovery, because those gowns are not pretty.
No, and they can make you feel quite vulnerable.
Yeah, totally.
And often you're in a health, you're in that situation because you do need some care, and you need significant care if you're in a hospital. And I was revisiting this as well, because when I was 8, after my nana had died, I had meningitis, and it was quite serious. I ended up in hospital, and as a child at 8, it was also quite surreal. And it's a time that I've sort of revisited myself, just to wonder how that impacts you as a person growing up and having an experience like that. And also when one of my own children had a health crisis and it looked like meningitis, and I suddenly was back in this space and thinking about that and remembering my experience. And part of that experience, I was in isolation, so it was quite a it was an interesting time, and I think it was probably quite formative in some ways around how I personally feel in the world. And so I think that using those hospital textiles was tapping into some of that experience.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's also an experience like that when you're younger. I don't think sometimes you realize until later how it affects you. And then sometimes it takes something like your child becoming sick that almost sort of triggers some of those emotions or some of those things you experienced, when you were younger that you didn't realize actually existed.
Yes, yeah. And that's definitely something that happened for me. And also the realizing that many people would never have had an experience like that, and so that things that you might take for granted about how you make decisions now or how you feel about certain situations, and and then sort of learning other people's stories, like connecting in with the selfie stitched and lockdown portrait, which we'll probably talk about.
Yes.
That came about me revisiting with my own kids, like Frida Kahlo's story and the self-portraits that she made, and her experience of being much more significant, much more serious illness, but also being in hospital, being immobilized, convalescing, all of those experiences, and how that kind of gives you this sort of maybe inner world or an inward focus because you're on your own and because you need a way through this new experience, new space.
Yeah. So was that your main focus when you were doing your masters? You were looking into that. Yeah. How did that look that year?
Well, it was really different, I think, and I don't think it's unusual. You might start your masters and think, this is the work I have, and this is what I'm going to get into and I'm going to do. And then there's this initial process of diving deep into what you're here for, and what's really the thread running through your practice, and who are the artists that you connect with and the stories you want to tell. And so I found quite quickly that while I had these bodies of work and interests, that wasn't what I was going to be working on formally. Yeah.
And sometimes you need to join something like that to kind of figure that out.
Yeah, that's right. And that's when the process is working and it's, positive outcome.
Yeah. So your show in 2020, which was at the end of that year of study, was called I Used to Find Dead Insects in Your Pockets.
Yes.
And that was an installation and performance piece.
Yes.
Which looks really fascinating. And I was just saying to you earlier, we've hardly had any guests talk about installations or performance as part of their art practice. So can you just tell us a little bit about how that looked and the process of making that work?
Sure. So the exhibition, I Used to Find Dead Insects in Your Pockets, was like a presentation of the research that I had been doing for my masters. It was a solo show at Jeff Wilson Gallery up here in Whangārei at the North Tech campus, and it had in it work that I had done and shared as part of my masters and my final submission, as well as some new works that I had made since, or I had time to jump back into after my masters. And the installation experience itself, it consisted of some textiles hanging in the space, which included these nylon net curtains that I had found at my nana's house when I was helping to pack it down. And they were, I found just boxes and boxes of these net curtains. So I dyed them and I stitched them together, and I made these quite large sort of banner type materials that could be hung in the gallery. The gallery is a beautiful space. It's got super high ceilings, so it's perfect for really big dramatic pieces that really fill the space. So I was able to expand and extend this exhibition in the gallery. It also included some curtains that my nana had made, which have this amazing like wild pink on one side and then this super bright orange on the other, which I always loved as a child. And they're pretty outrageous to have as an internal curtain in your home. Like, they're really pink and orange. So there's these clashing colours. There were also some folded blankets that were blankets that my nana had made handmade utility quilts is what they are. So my nana was less of a fine artist stitch maker, but she was a utilitarian person. So she would make these sturdy blankets that would last. It also included dead insects and jars of shells, some of which I had collected with my children and others of which I had collected with my nana, as well as some maidenhair ferns in various pots and sizes. So maidenhair fern had family history for me, and the exhibited ferns were originally from my mum when we lived in Auckland, that she grew in the garden and just kept going. And with maidenhair ferns, you can take a piece and that's the original plant. It's a rhizome, so they just continue. So it's like the mother plant had continued, and pieces of it had been shared with my family members and some of my friends, and I had cultivated lots of them in my own home. And for my installation, I asked if I could borrow them back and put them in the gallery, because I was quite interested in the ways that we connect in our relationships through objects. And I think my work, I'm quite often wanting to understand relationships and understand those connections. And they might be like interpersonal relationships or wider community relationships as well.
And how did you communicate your ideas behind that work in that show?
Well, there were stories that I had written that was part of my that accompanied the actual installation. So people could come and read the stories. I also did a performance in the gallery as well, where I, for about 45 minutes, I ironed one of my nana's blankets that's really damaged. And the framework around that, or the reason why I did that, is that I had looked at repairing the blanket for my nana. But on inspecting the blanket and seeing the damage and just looking at it and thinking, there's so much work that I need to do to repair it. There's also a lot of beauty in the way that the textile had started to perish. It was this beautiful floral, like bright orange and yellow on one side, and this kind of garish browny orange on the other. And the fabric itself had perished around the flowers. So the flower shapes, which were orange and yellow, were intact, and then the white space around them was coming apart. So as someone who enjoys textile and likes these unusual discoveries, it felt like I really love it as it is. And I found, so like, to repair something well, if it's a garment, I need to clean it and iron it and then lay it all out and figure out how it goes together. So the ironing would be part of the mending process for me. But then when it comes to repair, sometimes things, I might put another 20 hours into repairing the blanket, or I could put 20 hours into making another blanket. So there's this tension that it can exist, as with regards to making a new garment or making a new blanket or textile. And also, once something's gone so far, mending is just putting more holes in it. So for me, it felt like there's this complicated relationship going on.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And that performance part of it, was that just something that you did in the sort of opening of the show, or how did you maintain that aspect of the work?
Yes. So, well, with my master's, I did a number of performances and experimental performances as well. So key to my work has been looking at elements of care and rituals of care that often happen in the domestic space. And so what happens when we see that, and how we shine a light on that, and how we demonstrate value for all of that time. So I did a number of performances where I ironed things. Often this blanket got ironed probably 3 times, and just looked at that as a performance and a process. So the interesting thing, when I did the performance at Jeff Wilson Gallery, it was outside of the sort of art school master's space, and I started with one side of the space. I start my performance. I'd gone through it a number of times, and so I step to a certain space, take off my shoes, take my water and fill up the iron. And I unroll this blanket and I start from one end to iron one side. And then I work until I get ready to turn it over, and I do the other side. And in the gallery, when it was on, it was all part of the opening. So it was, performance starts at 5:30 or 6 o'clock or something. And the gallery was completely silent once I started, and everyone was still. And then after about sort of 30, maybe 20 minutes, there was a little bit of a noise that comes up. And I think it's interesting in a gallery when a performance happens, what the audience does. And so they were super quiet, not moving. And then I got to the end of one side of the blanket, and a friend of mine who was in the audience said to me afterwards, he said, and then once you flipped it over and we realized you were going to do the other side, there was almost like this, oh, this shared feeling of, I don't know if it was like, oh my goodness, hadn't thought of that, and so it seemed like it was quite an interesting, interesting and boring. It's like such a long process, and, meaningful, and also just, all I'm doing was ironing a blanket, but it seemed to give a lot to think about.
Yeah, and I love that you're kind of instigating thoughts for them in a way that they're thinking it's coming to an end, possibly, and then you turn it over and start again. Yeah,
and I think, like, for me, that hopefully that engaged ideas around, just the time that's involved in these things,
that's right.
And that we don't. And again, often women's work, how much time my nana spent ironing, probably many of our nanas have. So,
yeah, that's such an amazing way to communicate ideas, and it's something that I'm not that familiar with, and it's not a really common part of an artist's practice, is it?
There are definitely some artists who specialize in it. I think it's because of it being a less tangible experience. It's not a painting or a drawing that you can put in a gallery, or a sculpture that you can go and see in a park. It's quite different, and it's a one-off, which makes it both interesting and quite special if you can be at a performance.
Yeah, totally. It's very personal. For an artist who makes installations, how can you, unless you're selling it to an institution of some sort, it's not the kind, and for a collection or a collector possibly, but in general, it's not something that somebody would buy. So that must put extra pressure financially on the artist.
Yes, I think so. I think I don't get by doing performance work, and so I think many artists who are working at their practice, trying to get by, will have multiple streams of income, part-time jobs and other ways to make their work viable or make living viable. I think what has been useful for me is that I've given papers at symposia on it, also actually unpaid, but I've generated a lot of work for myself that I can channel out in other areas and other ways, and I think that comes into my stitch portraits, which are again highly labor intensive and take time.
Yeah. So let's talk about that amazing series of work, which you're still working on, aren't you?
Yes, it's ongoing. Yes.
Yeah. And the images of these beautiful stitched works will be on your blog, on our website, creativematters.co.nz, but also on your website, obviously, and your Instagram. Yes. But can you describe to us what these works look like and why you made them?
Sure. Well, initially the selfie stitched in lockdown began in lockdown. So I finished my master's in 2020, and then we went into lockdown, and we all had this shared experience of the pandemic and how that rolled out here. I had been conceptually in my work, as I've mentioned, I was really interested in relationships. I wasn't able to connect with communities and communities of artists in real life and keep working on this relationship stuff. And I'd started revisiting artists and portraiture with my kids while we were in lockdown. And I thought, well, the person I am in relationship with is myself, and I can make myself my subject matter. I can make as much work as I like. There's no ethical questions or no, sign off and asking friends and calling in favors. So I started working from selfies. So I would make a selfie for some reason and, send it to a friend or say, here, look, I'm out here taking my lockdown walk. I'm at the top of Carmel Hill and here I am. And so then these became the subject that I would look at now. And as I've mentioned earlier, that the idea of making portraits was never really something that occurred to me because they seemed quite formal. And I also felt like, I'm really not, am I a good enough drawer? Am I a good enough painter to make portraits? So I had started just making some experimental stitch works. They are based on the selfie. And what my process involves me taking a selfie, looking at the photographic image, pulling it back and looking for the lines. So I'm editing it digitally, and I'm looking for the lines and the expression. I'm also looking for something that connects with me in some way. So there's something there that I think, yeah, this is good. Let's roll with it and see. And so then, because I was also in lockdown, I just had my little black and white A4 printer. So they were all around A4 size. And I would draw them onto my cloth, and then I would start stitching. And the early ones were very that they were very peered back. It was just really looking at the line and the eye and some of the hair and some detail like that, and all hand stitched. I'm not trained as an embroiderer, and while I've learned some embroidery technique and stitches, I'm basically just using my own process and technique that I've developed.
And it's like you're drawing with thread.
Yeah, and that's when I've sort of had people have asked questions about it, and I'm like, no, it's really just a drawing. It just happens that I'm working in thread.
And from a distance, it does look like a drawing, doesn't it? Which is quite a lovely aspect of the work. And when you come closer, you can start to see the detail in the stitch.
Yeah, and lots of people have wondered if it's machine made. I'm like, I don't think a machine could do this.
No,
not really. So yeah, they started quite small, and I was my process is quite generative, so I make a lot of work just as by default. So I continued making them, and I refined and developed my technique, and I've got over 40 of them now, maybe around 50 small ones.
Wow.
Yeah. And
they're not all of you, are they? You've also introduced other people.
Well, I had this sort of a dilemma, because I went, well, if I'm using images of other people, how does that work, and how can I do that ethically and and respect the photographer, the sitter, and all those questions came up for me. So for a long time I made stitched portraits just of myself. I then started experimenting a bit and looked for some images that were free to use without breaching anyone's copyright. So I made a portrait of Catherine Mansfield. I was really interested in women from history, amazing artists that I didn't learn about properly until I was an adult. And I was connecting back with these books that my nana had, which were called the Victory Book for Girls or Girls Annuals, and they had these amazing stories and adventures of girls for girls. So I was like, well, what would I make for me as a kid, or future girls? Who would be in these books? And so I looked at Frida Kahlo was obvious, so I stitched her. I stitched Yoko Ono, Georgia O'Keeffe, many more artists, Eva Hesse, Dora Maar. I have Lee Miller, many artists that I've admired for such a long time. So, and at the moment they hang in my house. Some of them I've sold because people have been really keen on them themselves, and I do sell them. And I am also working towards a bigger project where I would like to show them in a gallery space, because I think that the thing with textiles is that they look quite different on screen to real life.
Yeah, I imagine. And they would be so beautiful. It'd make such an incredible show, I think. So you're using black thread,
Yes.
And what is the actual fabric that you're stitching into?
It's like a repurposed textile. So I've got old, really nice cotton sheets or other cotton materials that I've found either with op shops or they've been sheets on my bed. And I've dyed them with avocado skins and seeds. So that was something that I had experimented with my masters too.
And how do you
Yeah.
actually do that dyeing process?
It's a long process. I usually spread it over the course of 3 days. And I've used either fresh or dried avocado skins or seeds. The seeds and the skins produce slightly different colors with the textiles. And day one, I would chop up all the seeds and break up all the skins, and I would put them in pots. And to create the dye bath, I would just steep it for a couple of hours just in the kitchen. And then I would leave it overnight. And then the next day, I would rinse all my textiles so they're slightly damp, put them in the pots, turn the heat back on just really gently, and sort of let it steep again for a couple of hours. And then I would leave it overnight again. I've done variations on how long I leave it for and how long I steep it for. And then the final step is rinsing and then hanging on the line to let it dry.
So beautiful. And it's I didn't realize that you would heat the garment in the dye as well. That's really it's interesting. And is there any significance with the avocado, or is it just the right color for you that sort of takes the edge off the white?
It's a good color for me. It's also something that I could access without using other chemical based products, and it's a byproduct of eating avocados. So
yeah,
so that was it's just they end up in my garden or they end up in my dye bath.
Such a good use of something in your house that you're actually eating. And the works just have so much movement, and the way you capture expression is just phenomenal to me. And the way that you capture yourself or the person and sort of all the details of their features and their hair and that kind of thing is amazing. I mean, to be honest, I'm going to let you into a little secret. I have done some stitch works myself with my paintings, and I thought, oh, I'm so inspired by Angela's gorgeous stitch portraits. I'd like to make some of my grandsons. And so I used a photo of Dax and transferred it onto linen. And just as I drew the sort of lines, the main lines from that photo, it was just like, it was actually hilarious. Like George and I had such a laugh because it looked like a monkey to start with, for a start. But also, it was so much harder than I expected. I just thought I'll just transfer the lines over and then I'll have this great lineal image and then I'll start stitching it. But it's actually so much more to it than that.
Yeah, I think it's, I've been doing them since 2020 now. And I feel very much that it's taken this time to really feel like I've got my eye in now. And I still have works that are difficult, or I still have areas that that I'm not happy with. And, I've got some portraits that I'm just like, I just really not, it's not good. It's not what I want. And it's not what I was going for. I think for me, there's so many steps in the process that there's this potential for slippage and there's potential for, good choices and then less good choices. And, it's taken me a long time to get to that point. But, yeah, I think because I've made so many, because I've used, like often portrait artists will study themselves and refine their process and hone their skills in that way. So I hope that that's present in the work. Yeah. And I think,
they're very striking. And I feel they're really unique. And I just feel like this is something that you could just keep exploring for years to come, in different sort of variations of that idea.
Yes, I think so. Once I'd started making these small portraits, and they they'd been around, and I had shown them to people, and I'd shown people the fronts and the backs, and then there would be interesting conversations about the difference between the fronts and the backs. And often, if you're working in embroidery, you don't show the back of the work because that's the messy part, or that's that's not the face that you're working with. So there were a lot of interesting conversations that came out from that, including that the back is the more vulnerable side.
I love that.
And I remember early on showing this to my friend, and I was like, "Oh my God, well, I'm not showing anyone that side, that's for sure." Like,
Yeah.
And I felt like, for me, I had this internal conflict about, selfie culture is often looked down upon, and women taking selfies and sharing images of themselves. There's all of those complex issues that exist in the work too. So I was sort of, having these internal doubts or questions, or thinking, and who wants to see actually portraits of me? Really, if I come down to it, and it's what's the point of continuing the work, and why should I keep doing it? But I keep doing it, and I think it's partly about improving my own skills, and also wanting to keep seeing and keep looking, and I enjoy what comes as a result. And I've had some interesting experiences with upscaling them from A4 to sort of the A2 size or AO size, and that has brought whole other challenges to do with line and also time. Like the big fantasy cheerleader one that was in Changing Threads. That's like 2 or 3 months work.
Wow.
Just in the stitch, and the last couple of big embroideries are the same. The selfie stitch, the selfie with a teacup, that was a Molly Morpeth. That one also is months of work. And that one came about from my sort of deep dive into looking more specifically and intentionally at the history of portraiture, and the way that artists would create portraits that have all of these clues, and tell stories about the sitter, and talk about who they are and their personality and their values and their interests. So like with that one, was like, I'll hold a teacup. I enjoy drinking tea, and the photograph was taken in my bedroom, and there's books behind me, and I went with that. So it's a different compositionally. It's quite different to my other work. Yeah.
It's got a few more clues about your personality, possibly. And that reminds me of the Rita Angus painting, Betty Curnow. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it was often up at Auckland Art Gallery.
Yes.
And yeah, I just love that one. It's such a fantastic narrative. And again, talking to children about the clues the artist has given us to understand the person. It's fascinating. Just going back to the idea of showing the back.
Yes.
It's almost like the front has got the beautiful filter, and the back is reality almost. That kind of juxtaposition. It's a really lovely idea. And also that you do hang your works often from something. You don't necessarily have them right up against the wall, do you? Sometimes they're framed, and sometimes they're hanging like a banner. Yeah,
I have this constant question of, how do I show it now? I've made this work. Putting textile behind glass changes the way that we connect with it. There are obvious reasons why we do put artworks behind glass, and I think that they have a job to do, but also it changes how we feel about the work. And so it's an ongoing question for me, and I think it's because as I've worked and the project has evolved, the backs become more important and really quite interesting. So it's one of those questions that I answer at a later point. And like Fantasy Cheerleader, there's an image of it as a banner, and how that reads and how that looks. So
there's lots of different interesting ideas. Oh, so just from this is just a practical question, really. Do you actually put your fabric or the part that you're working on into an embroidery hoop and work on it like that and move the hoop around the large piece. Is that how you work?
Yes. I have a very large embroidery hoop, which is probably about 500 across. And so for my large works, I just I have the drawing on the textile and I move the hoop as I work.
Yeah. Amazing. Wow. Yeah, I can imagine that would take a very long time. And we were talking earlier about selling these kind of works. Do you think because they're selfies, they're going to be harder to sell?
Yeah, I think I had a friend say to me, another artist friend say, these are amazing and beautiful, but really, who wants a stitched portrait of you? And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, that wasn't a question I thought about when I started making them, right? And, artists, we often don't, we're coming from a place of needing to answer a question or try an idea or make a thing. But I have had people interested in buying them, and that's cool. I've got one in particular that a friend was really keen on buying, but it was a significant day, and at the time I wasn't ready for it to go. But it's the portraits of other artists that are the ones that have sold more easily.
And I guess, possibly you could decide that your self-portraits are one thing, and then you have maybe a more commercially viable part of your practice as well, possibly.
Yeah, maybe. I think it's difficult to make hand-stitched works commercially viable, to be honest. So I think this is one of those things that artists have to deal with if their work, if you spend 2 months making a work, pricing can be quite difficult, if you're thinking about the amount of time that you put to your work. So for me, the income that I'm able to generate is through my mentoring work and my creative practice work and curating or writing that I do as well. So yeah,
like many artists, you have your finger in many pies, as they say. Yes. I think that's a very old-fashioned saying, actually. But anyway, showing my age. So let's just move on to talking about the other work that you do. So you're writing. I've read some of the articles you've written, and you've got an amazing blog, which is just jam-packed full of, personal responses to things, or all sorts of things. It's a really valuable resource, I think. So it's worth checking out on your website. So you write in that capacity. Are you writing in other ways, and how are you curating? And then we could possibly get on to talking about your creative practice business.
Yeah, sure. So I write when I'm curating an exhibition. So the last couple of years I've done group exhibitions for the art collective that I'm part of, Collective Practice. And I'll write an essay about the exhibition and draw the work together. And that essay sits alongside the exhibition itself. So again, I'm making connections in relationship to the artists and their work and the works within each other's making. Yeah. And so I also write on a Substack where I put up resources and information for artists around things like grant writing and proposal writing and some of those practical things. Yeah, so that's what my writing practice is about.
Oh, that's so good. And can I just change the subject slightly, and can you please explain to me what Substack is?
It's just like a blogging platform or a writing platform, but you can monetize it. So you can write articles that are available for free, or you can have like a subscriber only content. You can have various tiers. So it's kind of a way for independent writers and artists and other people who work in that space to earn a little bit of income from their work. Yeah, so it's just like a blog, but it has those other features that you can add into it.
Right. And Threads on Instagram, is that different again?
I think it's meant to be like the Twitter version.
Yeah, like conversations or something.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
like Instagram I see is much more suitable for visual and, image-based sharing, whereas Threads I think is trying to connect into like writers who put up a little bit of written content and maybe link to articles and so on.
And back to your creative practice,
Mm,
you're offering mentorship and you have funding for next year to have people or artists, I presume, in Northland working with you, which
yes.
is incredible. So can you tell us about how that works and how people could become involved?
Yeah, sure. So big long story, hopefully short, the funding for it came from MCH, Manatū Te Onga, Ministry for Culture and Heritage, as part of the COVID recovery funding that they rolled out. And I had been offering sort of 10-week workshops for artists in Whangārei, partly funded by Creative Communities grants, partly funded by our regional arts organisation, Creative Northland. I was only able to secure sort of small chunks of funding to do this work, but I would advertise them and I would have twice the number of artists that I could support wanting to join. So 3 years ago is when I started, and there was a strong case for me to keep continuing it. But as with the arts, funding is always a problem. And when this opportunity to apply for some regeneration funding came up, I was like, this is it. They're wanting to fund projects that deliver long-term resilience, capability building, all of these buzzwords. But they want to fund you for about a year and a half or a year. Now, resilience doesn't, it takes longer than a year to build resilience and capability and long-term sustainable outcomes. So it felt a little bit challenging, but I put in a proposal, spent over 100 hours of my own time writing it. And first round, it was unsuccessful. The third round, it was, which was quite an amazing accomplishment at the time, because most of the other applicants were organizations or businesses.
Wow. And good on you for trying again. I mean, it can be soul destroying when you're not successful.
It's so gutting, and there's so much work involved, and
Yeah.
you have to have a 12-month project plan and your supporters and everything.
Yeah, it's huge. And when you actually reapplied, did you just copy and paste and reapply, or did you make some changes?
Yeah, I had to make some changes. They had a different process to what I'd worked with in the past with CNZ or Creative Communities, whereby you have your initial project proposal. If you're not successful, they'll give you feedback. And so you have an opportunity to meet with like a funding advisor.
That's
And
good.
yeah, it was really great. And they say, you need to speak more to this and you need to add more information here. And yes, you should get some letters from your supporters, even though it wasn't needed in the initial formal application.
Yeah.
So I basically went, I will do exactly what they've advised me to do. And maybe I won't get it. Probably I won't get it. And this is my last chance. If this doesn't work, I'm out of the arts. I've got to get a job somewhere else because it's just too hard.
Yeah.
But then my project was successful.
Which is so good. And
Blew me over.
there's so much hard work, isn't there, to prepare for funding applications and make all those connections with the people that are going to be involved if you get the funding. I mean, it's massive.
It's so huge. And I think, like, I've applied for funding for the community group I'm involved in, a community gallery, and we've not been successful. And it's like I've let the whole team down. It's like this project is for the community, so it's not just me. It's it's all the other people that benefit and will be brought in to do work and be paid, as well as the artists who benefit from the support.
Yeah.
So these projects is really significant, and I think unless you've been behind the scenes and put your hand in, pitched, it's can be hard for people to understand.
Yeah, it really can be. And I was successful with funding from CCS, as the listeners may know, for 20 episodes of the podcast. So that meant I could pay the artist for their time, which felt really good, and contribute to my costs. And then the third time I missed out, and I was so sort of, that first 24 hours, I just thought, oh, they're not valuing what I'm doing, or, they're not seeing the work, the value of it for other people. But then I just had to get over myself and think, no, I know what I'm producing is great and can help lots of people. I just did something wrong with that application. I need to kind of revisit and regroup and really look at what I'm saying, what I'm giving them, and make some adjustments. And I think I did get complacent as well because I'd been successful. So I thought, oh, well, they're obviously supporting my podcast. Great.
Yes.
They like me, and the last ones were successful. So that formula worked. So
Yes.
I'm just going to kind of copy and paste parts of it, update parts of it, get more references and feedback from listeners and guests, and I thought that would be okay, but it wasn't. So in a way, it was good learning and made me think, okay, what do I need to do to get that funding?
Did you have a conversation with them about it afterwards? Have you talked to them?
I haven't, no.
I think I advise everyone to do that. And if you're not successful, sometimes the funders will have time and space to give you feedback. One other thing with creative community schemes is that, and this is a problem that I've had, is that they don't want to be providing necessarily, and it might be regional, they won't necessarily want to provide funding every year for the same people and the same projects.
Yeah.
Which is where I'm at, where creative communities won't fund me for another year at least. And so I'm like, okay, even if it's different artists and a different project, that might be worth just touching base and checking with. Because it might be that Creative New Zealand might be the next best step for you.
Yeah, well, I think with the sort of rejig and the way they support people in the arts, it might be. I feel like there is a category for me now, and there wasn't before.
Yes.
Yeah. But it is interesting with creative communities, and we're totally slightly going off topic, and we are going to be a little bit longer today, but who cares? This is a really interesting conversation. Oh, you'd think in some ways that creative communities scheme and the councils or whoever the funding bodies are, you'd think that they would see the longevity as a huge thing that they need to support. It's to me just giving someone support for a moment of something.
Yes,
is not what it's about, because you need to grow and continue through this journey to make the product better and better and better, and to reach more and more people. So you'd think the actual looking at it a sort of from a long-term perspective is actually important.
Yes, I think so. I think from my experience, what funders have wanted from my work is that they would be like, well, we want to fund something that should be able to fund itself somehow, which I think is magical thinking, because that's not how the art world works. It's really, we don't necessarily have the patronage that we need. It's hard to get a sponsor who will support this, because what we deliver is less tangible. There's ways to write about it in a way that can fit, but it's real tricky, because what we're offering is something that will be giving returns in like 10 years or 20 years.
But we need to see it like that, I think.
Yeah.
So if somebody in the Northland region, Te Tai Tokoro, if somebody was wanting to be a part of creative practice with you, what would they expect to gain from it?
The primary thing that I focus on are the group workshops with artists, and that's about bringing artists together. We look at your studio practice and your work. It's like a bit like going back to art school, where you have crits, and you have conversations about what you're making. You might share some new project that you're wanting to do. That's like the foundation, because we need to look after our creative practice. So studio making needs to be robust. And alongside of that, I have short courses or workshops around strategic planning, entering art awards, how to apply for funding, writing good project proposals, and that sort of a thing, as well as things like having guest speakers come in and talk about marketing and social media for artists. And I've got an accountant coming in to talk to us in the new year about accounting for artists and creatives. Often we're sole traders, or we're part-time jobs and juggling some other sources of income. So it's sort of scaffolding around the studio wherever it is that you do your making, that making practice with the business tools and knowledge and experience.
Sounds amazing.
Mm.
Yeah. And how would somebody get in touch with you? Do they just go onto your website?
Yep. If you hop on my Instagram, I've got my Substack, which has got lots of information on there. You can also hop on my blog, send me an email at Creative Practice if you need to ask questions. Yeah.
Brilliant. Sounds amazing. You have a really robust sort of marketing approach, I would say. There are, I think, 5 or 6 links that relate to you and your life and the work that you do, which are at the bottom of your blog post. And yeah, you seem to be very present on Instagram, and you're sharing your work a lot in your process. And then you have, separate accounts for your different parts of your business and your art practice. So that is obviously a big way that you communicate and share your work. Do you feel like you need to also have galleries showing your work or being part of that conversation?
I would very much like to be able to show my work in the gallery space. However, I think that it's really challenging for artists to find galleries to represent them now. And I think that that's why a lot of artists like myself have embraced online platforms to showcase their work. So while I have a long-term goal to have my work in the gallery space, the way that I work towards that is one thing is by entering art awards. Entering your work in art awards. If you make the finals, your work is hung in a professional space. It's a great foot in the door to connecting with a wider audience and other people who might get behind your work. If, like me, you're not represented by a gallery, or you're not, you don't have regular or consistent access to a professional gallery space. So,
yeah. And are you interested in approaching sort of more local, low-key galleries that aren't actually dealer galleries?
That's a really interesting question. I wonder where those galleries are. Because here in Whangārei, we have a public art gallery. We have Whangārei Art Museum. We have the Shutter Room Gallery, which I curate for and I'm on the committee for, which has a focus on photographic practice. So I serve there and showcase other people's works. We have a couple of other galleries where you can rent the space and have an exhibition, but you need to cover all of those costs yourselves. Then we have sort of more retail spaces where people, in like Northam, we have lots of tourists. We have quite a high number of galleries that show work for sale, retail works. So you can, but you also might find in those spaces books or other craft objects or things. So I think that there's quite a range of different spaces to show work, and I haven't found the right place in Whangārei, at least. So there are galleries that I follow and I admire because they have a commitment to textile work or beautifully crafted work. But I think if I'm working with self-portraits, I don't know where they go, other than the New Zealand Portrait Gallery.
Yeah, it's very tricky, isn't it?
It's really tricky. And one of my goals is with the Portraiture Award that New Zealand Portrait Gallery hosts every couple of years, but that they have to be, they're not open to stitched drawings.
Oh, really?
So it needs paintings. Yeah. And I emailed them specifically because I was like, damn, I really want, this feels like the place where I can show my work, right?
What a shame.
It's a different medium. Yeah.
Park and Drawing Prize.
Yeah, I've entered it for a number of years, but I just haven't got my work through. So, yeah, I think, art prizes is a whole nother conversation because, and that's something that I build into my strategic thinking around my practice is keeping an eye on there and entering them. So, yeah.
There's so much we could be talking about, isn't there?
There's so much. That might have to be another conversation.
Yes, I'll come back to you in a year or so and we'll carry on. So I guess that probably takes us to question time.
Yes.
if that's okay with you. What would you say to your younger artistic self?
I would just say hang in there and keep going, and have fun. It gets easier, sort of. Yeah.
What challenges do you face as an artist?
I think instability and some kind of, I need to move them from the precarity of my working situation. That's my ongoing challenge. Yeah.
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 And which artists inspire you?
Oh, so many. There's amazing, beautiful artists in my art collective practice. So those are local living artists here in Whangārei. And we just keep each other going by staying in touch and talking about what we're working on. Artists from history, I very much admire Louise Bourgeois, who made so much work and across a whole range of mediums that I really identify and connect with. Dora Maar is an interesting artist I admire, as well as Lee Miller, who was a photographer but had experienced some quite extreme and significant challenges in her personal life, and how that rolled out for her as a creative practitioner. Yeah, so many artists in my tops.
It's hard to choose just a few, isn't it? It's a very tough question.
Yeah.
And why do you think you make the kind of work you make?
I think I'm trying to understand relationships and trying to understand and see those threads of connection and try to know better what's going on. I think I sometimes find people really confusing, but I feel like if I can look at their art and their making, I can understand some of the stories. So that.
And just one extra question, not actually on the list.
Mm.
Can you ever see yourself moving into using other media?
I would really like to start painting again, actually, at some point, yeah. And I've played around a little bit with ceramic and slip casting, which I'm quite interested in. And I've had that question of whether I could make some dolls out of ceramics rather than textile, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Watch this space.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. And also with your stitch works, your thread works, could you ever imagine using color or using different types of fabric?
Yes, that's a question that I've had put to me before. And at the moment, it's a no to color. I felt like these are drawings. And at the moment, I think I might need to become more confident as a painter if I was going to think about using more color.
Oh, well, Angela, thank you so very much for agreeing to be on the podcast. It's been lovely to have you along, and you've got so many ideas. As we said before, we actually probably need seriously about 4 hours to talk about all of the things that you could share. So I suggest that anyone who wants to hear more from you gets onto your social media pages and into your website. And hopefully one of the listeners might end up joining you in creative practice. Yeah, it's been fascinating, and thank you so much for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. It's been really lovely, and I just really admire your work, and I think you're doing an excellent thing by bringing artists together and sharing about their work. I enjoy it. It's good.